Enjoy a video clip about some German World War I and World War II aircraft that are exhibited in the United States. The nimble Fokker Dar-1 earned a reputation as one of the best World War I dogfighters and is often linked with the career of World War I's highest scoring ace, Germany's Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. Pilots were impressed with its agility, and several scored victories with this highly maneuverable triplane. Von Richthofen scored 19 of his last 21 victories while flying the Dar-1. None of the 320 Dar-1s survived, so this is a reproduction that is displayed at the Air Force Museum. Yunker CL1 was a ground attack aircraft developed in Germany during World War I. It was a low-wing monoplane with mostly metal construction. It had tandem seating with the pilot in the front cockpit and the gunner-observer in the rear. Its metal construction deviated from the normal wood and fabric construction, limiting its production, so the plane had little impact during the war. This is a reproduction that was photographed at the 2005 A Gathering of Eagles Air Show. The Halberstadt CL4 was introduced into combat during the last great German offensive of World War I and was one of the best ground attack aircraft of the war. It was equipped with fixed and flexible machine guns and was able to hand-drop grenades and small bombs and was very effective in this role, relying on its good maneuverability to avoid ground fire. It also performed as an interceptor against Allied night bombing raids and served as a night bomber against troop concentrations in airfields near the front lines. It was a hunted target by Allied pursuit squadrons, but it gave a good account for itself in dogfights. This CL4 is displayed at the Air Force Museum, while this one is displayed at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. The Fulker D7 was one of Germany's most capable World War I fighters. It entered combat in May 1918 and quickly made its mark in the skies over Western Europe by scoring 565 kills in August alone. It was so dominant that the Versailles Treaty mandated their surrender to the Allies, with the U.S. Army getting 142 of them. 6 of the 142 went to the Navy, where the Marine Corps used them as trainers until 1924. The Naval Aviation Museum's D7 is a replica constructed using some original parts and underwent a complete rework by students at the Pensacola Junior College. The D7 displayed at the Air Force Museum is a reproduction and went on display in May 1996. The Yunker's Ju-52 trimotor was first built in the 1930s and remained in service for more than a quarter century. It was operated as a 17-seat airliner or utility transport aircraft by various civil operators during the 1930s. It served throughout World War II as a versatile workhorse of the German transport fleet. As a transport, it could carry 3 tons of freight with good short-field performance. It delivered the attacking forces and their supplies during the German invasion of Norway, Denmark, France, and the Low Countries in 1940. Almost 500 Ju-52s participated in the historic airborne assault on the island of Crete in May 1941, and Junkers later supplied Rommel's armored forces in North Africa. This Ju-52 is exhibited at the Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum and is a Spanish-built Casa 352L that is also known as an Ant Ju. This photo is of another Ant Ju that was displayed at the Air Force Museum but is currently in storage. Bwolf FW4 Steiglitz Goldfinch was a 2-seat trainer that was an international success, was used by the Luftwaffe as a primary trainer, and is exhibited at the Fantasy of Flight Museum in Central Florida. Booker's Bu-133 Youngmeister was designed to be an airshow demonstration aircraft, and it dominated the aerobatic scene in Europe and the United States from the mid-1930s through the 40s. In the 1930s, it served as an advanced trainer for the Luftwaffe. The Smithsonian's Youngmeister was flown exclusively by aerobatic champions. The one at the Fantasy of Flight Museum is painted in the colors of the famous Romanian aerobatic pilot Alex Pampana, who flew one in demonstration at the 1936 Berlin Olympics inside the track and field stadium. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 began as an entry in a Luftwaffe fighter competition in the early 1930s. While the Messerschmitt's creation incorporated one of the most advanced aerodynamic designs at the time, with retractable landing gear, an enclosed cockpit, automatic slats, cantilever wings, and stress skin construction. The first production models began coming off the line in 1936. During World War II, it was the backbone of the Luftwaffe fighter force, serving on all fronts and also in the air forces of its European allies. In the invasion of France in May 1940, the Bf-109E, not shown, outfought French MS-406s and British Hawker Hurricanes. In the air battles over the English Channel and later during the Battle of Britain, the Bf-109E exposed its short range and also met its equal, the Supermarine Spitfire. Its short range prevented it from escorting Luftwaffe bombers past London, leaving bombers attacking the greater part of the British Isles unescorted. More than half of the Luftwaffe single-engine fighter units involved in the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 flew the Bf-109G, shown here at the Air Force Museum. Even though the superior FW-190 began to replace it in some units as early as the summer of 1941, production of the Bf-109 actually rose until the closing months of the war, and it remained the most numerous Luftwaffe fighter. After World War I, Germany faced strict limits on developing or using powered aircraft, so they turned to gliders for studying aerodynamics and pilot training. The SG-38, shown here at the Air Force Museum, served as the standard glider used by Luftwaffe student pilots for basic flight instructions in the late 1930s and into the 40s. Booker's Bu-181 Bestman appeared in 1939 as a general-purpose aircraft designed as a trainer for the German Luftwaffe during World War II and was operated throughout the war. Yunker's Ju-88 was one of the most versatile airplanes of World War II. It operated in nearly every kind of combat role, including dive bomber, level bomber, night fighter, day interceptor, photographic reconnaissance, tank destroyer, and even an unpiloted missile. The airplane on display at the Air Force Museum is a Ju-88D-1 Trop, a long-range photographic reconnaissance version modified for tropical use. Completed in June 1943, this aircraft was delivered to Romania, an ally of Germany, during World War II. In July 1943, a disillusioned Romanian pilot flew the aircraft to Cyprus to defect to British forces there. It is painted in the Romanian Air Force markings it carried during that defection. The Focke-Wulf FW190 appeared in action over northwestern France in September 1941 and rapidly proved its superiority over the Mark V Spitfire, Britain's best fighter at the time. The FW190D Interceptor, shown here exhibited at the Air Force Museum, was considered by many German pilots to be the finest piston-engine fighter in Luftwaffe service. The longer-nosed F-190D with a redesigned tail was a success with pilots because of increased engine reliability and performance much superior to the FW-190A in climb, dive, and level speed. pilots considered it more than a match for the P-51D Mustang. Eastern Front operations led to several new variants, including the F-190F fighter bomber, which was designed with special emphasis on ground attack operations. The airplane carried 360 kilograms, 794 pounds, of armor, including sections of steel plate behind the pilot's head, on the lower engine cowling, and the wheel well doors. The F-8 model, shown here exhibited at the Smithsonian, became the most important variant of the entire F-series. Using kits supplied by the factory, frontline units could adapt these airplanes to carry various combinations of heavy cannons, bombs, rockets, and even torpedoes. The FW190 excelled as both a fighter and ground attack aircraft, but the German aircraft industry could not build enough of both types simultaneously. By the fall of 1944, Luftwaffe ground attack wings operating FW190s could muster little more than ineffective pinprick attacks against Allied ground forces closing in from the east and the west. The FA-330 Sandpiper rotary wing kite was an autogyro that provided a one-man elevated observation platform while being towed behind a surfaced submarine. While aloft, the pilot kept in contact with the submarine by telephone. It was attached to the submarine by a steel cable working from a winch on the deck. The FA-330 on display at the Air Force Museum is one of very few in existence out of the 200 that were built. The FITEX was a German precision-guided, armor-piercing bomb used with deadly effect against Allied ships in the Mediterranean in 1943. Henkel's HE-219 has been described as the best Luftwaffe World War II night fighter, and this one is exhibited at the Smithsonian Museum. It was fast, maneuverable, and carried devastating firepower, and was the only piston-engine Luftwaffe night fighter which could meet the fast British de Havilland Mosquito on equal terms. Advanced features included cannons mounted to fire at an oblique angle, the first steerable nose wheel on an operational German aircraft, and the world's first ejection seat on an operational aircraft. The cannon's oblique installation allowed attacks to be made on bombers from their vulnerable underside while avoiding defensive gunfire. Arado's AR-234B Blitz Lightning was the world's first operational jet bomber and reconnaissance aircraft. Its maximum speed of 735 kilometers, 459 miles per hour, enabled the Blitz to easily elude Allied piston-engine fighters. The Blitzes that reached Luftwaffe units provided excellent service, especially as reconnaissance aircraft. This AR-234B served with Bomber Unit KG-76 from December 1944 until British forces captured it in Norway in May 1945, and is exhibited at the Smithsonian Museum and is the sole survivor of this type. The Dornier DO-335 was one of the fastest propeller-driven aircraft ever flown. The Germans claimed that a pilot flew one at a speed of 763 kilometers per hour, 474 miles per hour, in level flight at a time when the official world speed record was 755 kilometers per hour, 469 miles per hour. Two liquid-cooled engines, each developing about 1,750 horsepower, powered it. One engine was mounted in the nose and the other in the tail in a unique low-drag push-pull configuration. Only one example of the first production version rolled off the assembly line before the war ended. The Dornier 335 displayed at the Smithsonian is a pre-production version and was the second one built. Messerschmitt's Me-163 Comet holds the distinction of being the first and only tailless rocket-powered interceptor to see operational service and the first piloted aircraft to exceed 1,000 kilometers per hour. Early combat experience demonstrated several problems that prevented the Comet from becoming an effective weapon. The aircraft's two 30mm cannons were capable of downing a 4-engine bomber with only 3 or 4 hits, but the Comet's high speed, coupled with the cannon's low rate of fire and short range, made effective gunnery nearly impossible against slow-moving bombers. It carried enough fuel for 8 minutes of powered flight. After 1 or 2 firing passes, the pilot had to glide back to base with no means of escaping Allied escort fighters. JG-400 was the only operational Comet group and scored 9 kills while losing 14 of its own aircraft. This Me-163 Comet is displayed at the Air Force Museum, while this Comet is displayed at the Smithsonian. Nicknamed Schwab, Swallow, the Messerschmitt Me-262 surpassed the performance of every other World War II fighter. Faster than the North American P-51 Mustang by 190 kilometers, 120 miles per hour, the Schwab restored to the faltering German Luftwaffe a short-lived qualitative superiority that it had enjoyed earlier in the war. The German jet scored heavily against Allied bomber formation. U.S. Army Air Force bombers, however, destroyed hundreds of them on the ground. Messerschmitt factories produced 1,443 Swallows, but only about 300 saw combat. Most Swallows did not make it to operational units because of the destruction of Germany's surface transportation system. Many of those that did were unable to fly because of lack of fuel, spare parts, or trained pilots. The Me-262, exhibited at the Air Force Museum, is painted without operational markings as an aircraft that just left the production line. The one displayed at the Naval Aviation Museum served with the famous Fighter Wing 7 and, according to the tally on the fuselage, the pilot scored 42 victories over Soviet fighters and 7 over American bombers and fighters. The German Warstall X-4 was a small air-to-air World War II wire-guided missile that could be fired at heavily armed Allied aircraft from a distance. 1,000 X-4 airframes were produced in late 1944, but an Allied air raid destroyed their BMW engines and production lines, and the program never recovered. 8,600 V-1 buzz bombs were launched from the northern shores of occupied France over a period of 2 months in 1944. While many were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire and fast-flying British Meteor jet aircraft, more than 2,000 fell on London. The German Army developed the V-2, the first practical modern ballistic missile, as an alternative to super long-range artillery, which the Treaty of Versailles prohibited after World War I. The first operational V-2 launch took place on September 8, 1944, and the last on March 30, 1945, with 1,115 V-2s hitting England and 1,524 falling on continental Europe, and the total V-2 rocket damage in England saw 2,754 killed and 6,543 severely wounded. I hope you enjoyed this video featuring German World War I and II military aircraft that are displayed in the United States.